back to the podcast, Marshall. It's so great to have you here again.
Thanks for having me.
And in particular, it's awesome to be celebrating this because this November is the 10th anniversary of the Boystown series, which is 12 books, and it's won a Lambda Literary Award, and it's been a finalist 5 other times, which is incredible. Congratulations, first of all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And for those who haven't explored this series, tell us what this is about.
Okay, well, it's a mystery series. It takes place in Chicago. It spans from 1981 to 1985. It follows a guy named Nick Nowak, who is a former CPD officer and now a private eye. And it tracks his cases and his relationships with his friends and lovers and all that stuff.
And how are you celebrating this decade milestone?
Well, the big thing that I want everyone to know is I'm reducing the price on all the ebooks to $3.99 for the entire month.
Oh, so that's awesome. That's like a 2-for-1, I think, in most cases.
Yeah, it's usually $6.99. So it's a chance to get in and buy them if you like them and start if you haven't tried them before. So that's the big
awesome.
thing.
Everybody should go out and get them right now.
And of course, I'm doing things like this to celebrate as well. So,
which is also good. It's so nice to celebrate these kind of milestones in gay fiction. What was the inspiration for the series back when you began?
Well, I'm going to go way back. It's kind of funny. Once in the 90s, I did my natal chart. And I'm not normally this like touchy-feely, but it said I was going to be a mystery writer, which I thought was very odd. I wasn't really that interested. And like about 10 years later, maybe 15, I was writing screenplays. I've been writing them for about 10 years and spec scripts and not really kind of, getting some bites here and there, but not really making a living or anything. And the thing I realized about screenplays is that they're not finished until they're a movie. So basically 10 years, I didn't finish anything. And that part of it actually got more frustrating than not making any money. And so I started looking around and found a little publisher that wanted gay erotica for Christmas. And that was a very new concept to me. And so I thought, I have to try this. And so I wrote the one short story for Torqueer and then was fishing around looking for something else to do. And I thought, well, I could actually do a mystery, and had loved, Sue Grafton and people like that, and thought, okay, yeah. And I also was very familiar with Joseph Hanson's work, and I thought, okay, I can do this. And originally, I thought of it as a short story series, which is why the first several books are short story collections. But what happened was I wrote the first 2, and the publisher said, okay, well, we can publish them way down the road because they had a glut of short stories. And I was like, okay, that's a really long time. And they said, if you put them together in one book, we can do it faster. So I did that. And that's how they became books. And then gradually I moved to the novel format. So that's the evolution of how I got started with it, I guess.
Where did the idea for the overall story of Boystown come from?
Golly. It just sort of evolved piece by piece. I mean, I've always been playing with elements of masculinity and how some guys, in some respects, Nick is like this James Bond, Raymond Chandler kind of character, except for being gay at the beginning of the series. And he does kind of change as it goes along. And so I was just sort of playing with those things. And the story kind of evolved piece by piece in ways that I wasn't really expecting. Like the very first story I wrote, which was called Little Boy Found, he's hired to find this kid, this little twink, whose name is Brian. And that character, he's still in the books. I'm still writing about Brian Pearson. All these books later. And when I first, introduced him, I had no idea that I was going to be doing that I would be keeping him. And the characters have basically popped up along the way. and introduced themselves and decided to stay. And some of that actually comes from just logic. It's like if you're a small-time PI in Chicago in the 80s, you're going to go to people who know things that you already know. You're not going to dig out complete strangers. You're going to go, okay, I'm going to talk to this person and that person. And that's how a lot of the characters evolved, is like they were needed for the stories.
Mm-hmm. You wrote a lot of your work in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And what is it about that decade in time that draws you in that way?
Well, I lived in Chicago from 1980 to 1986, 87. And so there's an ease and familiarity. They say write what you know. And of course, in my spare time, I'm a private detective. Actually, I'm not. And so, what you want to do actually as a writer is you mix things you know and things you don't. So I know Chicago well from that period. So that part of it was actually very easy. And a lot of the places that Nick lives and goes, they're my old apartments or apartments of friends of mine or places I worked and things that I did. And so I was able to kind of just throw all of that in, which made it very easy. And certainly, it is a very important period. I mean, and typically people look at it as being important because of AIDS, but I think it was important for a lot of reasons beyond that. It's been very interesting writing about the early days of AIDS and what people were saying, and kind of capturing that story like a worm's eye view of it, because typically it's kind of, it's the focus of the story, and this is actually just something that's happening to everybody. Mm-hmm. And so they're hearing things, and people are getting sick, and people die, but it's like, and people start to survive and start to do things to fight back, and these are just people's lives rather than being a story about that. So that's been interesting. And as I've gone along, I just realized how much the world changed from 1981 to 1985. It starts with Ronald Reagan's inauguration. It's in the first story. And the world just gets a little meaner and meaner every day.
Mm-hmm.
That's, what started us on this journey to where we are now. So, although it's interesting, to write about Dynasty and to write about the big puffy dresses everyone was wearing and how everybody was like, which is better now? And kind of like came out of the closet and was like, yes, we won't pretend we give a shit about anybody.
How much have you learned along the way, looking at that side of things, that you write what you know, but as you said, you're not a PI. How much have you learned over the years of the PI game to write the series?
I'm always very, aware of it and have researched things. And certainly, one of the things that Nick says a lot in the first few books is the job is a lot of paperwork and it's very boring until it's not. And he actually does a lot. I'm really surprised sometimes that I got away with this, but he does a lot of paperwork. And a lot of the stories that I'm writing about him doing paperwork, he's actually searching through files. He goes a lot to the main library in Chicago and goes down in the Fish room and is reading newspaper articles. And I'm surprised people find that as interesting as they do. But that's really what it is. It's like it's a lot of digging in paper until somebody tries to shoot you.
That's a great quote just on its own right there.
Well, he says things. I think one of the lines I wrote was like, it's a really boring job and interspersed with moments that no one should ever have to deal with.
Having gone from your chart that said you were going to be a mystery writer to where
Yes.
you are now, were you even interested in mystery at all as like a genre that you read or watched on TV or something? Or where do you think that mystery thing kind of started wrapping itself in?
I think, I have very clear memories of picking up the Branstetter series by Joseph Hansen in the mid 80s, the late 80s. I started reading those, and those were just really interesting. And it's one of the few series that I grabbed onto and read everything I could get my hands on. I mean, certainly as a kid, who watched Magnum PI and Perry Mason and all of those shows. So, I mean, I had about as much familiarity as everybody else in the world, but I really didn't start digging into mystery writers until the 80s. And I've always been a big Sue Grafton fan as well. I love the way that she includes all the minutiae of her characters' lives. It's like, Kinsey Mulholland likes particular kinds of peanut butter and pickled sandwiches, and she wears this kind of dress, and she runs every morning, and those things are actually very important. And I think what I took from that was that it's a great opportunity to write about how we lived then and to capture very real details about our lives that it's hard to capture them on their own for people without a genre story to hang them on.
Mm-hmm. Did you plan for the series to go as long as it has with 12 books?
No. I just kept writing them. And, the 12 books have several distinct arcs that cover different books and kind of come to an end, and then another one starts. And I just kind of felt this was the right time to stop. So I'm actually writing the last book, they speak.
And that'll be number 13?
Number 13. I'm calling it Fade Out, which is 2 words. And so it's a nod to my past as a screenwriter, but it's also a nod to Joseph Hansen's first Branstetter book, which was also called Fade Out, 1 word.
Okay. I like all the multiple meanings there. That's very cool.
Yes. And so he's sort of reaching the end of Chicago.
Are you going to move forward into 1986 in this last book, or stay in 85?
It stays in 1985, and unlike most of the other books, it starts immediately after the previous book. Usually it's a gap, but for various reasons, things that I set up in the last book have to be paid off immediately.
Does it have a release date yet, when people can expect it to come out?
It'll be sometime in January. It'll probably take me another, 2 or 3 weeks to finish it, and then it goes to my editor, and we go back and forth, and then it goes to the proofreaders. So, yeah, it's about another 3 months.
Is there anything you can kind of tease us about what's going to happen in the big finale?
It is actually going to... well, I said that it brings up an interesting point, actually. I mean, one of the joys of writing this series pretty much on my own, I worked with 2 publishers on it, but they didn't really give me a lot of direction. And I've done everything since book 7 on my own. And the interesting thing about writing a mystery series is if you're working with a big publisher, they're going to want you to write the same book over and over and over again. Because that's what the audience wants. And that's actually, and it's not that I don't do that. It's just that I've had a lot more freedom to, end one story. I have ended in, a room full of people and you did it. And then other ones I've actually ended violently. And then others, I've looked for different ways to end the books. I've looked for different ways to raise the stakes in the middle, because I've had more freedom to play with the genre that I think most, mystery writers have when they work with a big publisher. And so the last book is going to be kind of action-packed, which I don't always do. So it's going to be trying to go out on a big note.
As it should after so many books. You should go out with that bang, right?
Yes.
And maybe even a literal bang, since it's a mystery.
Well, he's not having as much sex as he had in the early books. There were lots of bangs then.
It's hard to ask this of authors. because it's always like picking your children. But do you have a favorite installment of the series?
Actually, that's an easy answer. My favorite is Boystown 4, A Time for Secrets. It's the first of the it's the first full-length book that I wrote in the series. And I really like it because, history is an important element of the books. And in that book, he does a case for this guy who wants to find somebody he knew in the 50s. And then during the course of everything, he finds this guy's journal. And so he's reading these journal entries that go back to the 50s. So it's telling a contemporary story about what happens when he looks for the guy that he wants to find. And then you get the backstory of what was going on with them early on. The two stories and the two time periods kind of interconnect. And so that was really, I think, fun and interesting. And one of the things I enjoy about the series always is just looking up the history and writing down what happened and how we've evolved. And so that's why that's my favorite.
Nice. Has it been difficult writing a series rooted in the 80s and making sure you don't introduce something that's too modern in it? Because, I mean, just in terms of how crimes get solved and like what's available, you had him going down, into the library to look at the microfiche, which I thought was awesome because I have great memories of looking at microfiche as a kid, right? Doing term papers and stuff. But do you have to think about a lot of like what he could and could not do in like 1980, whatever?
Well, yes. I mean, I do have to check up on things. And in certain respects, it's easier because I'm not running a procedural. So I don't have to think about how the police behaved in the 80s, although he interacts with them frequently. And I have actually tried to, incorporate what I know about the CPD from that period. So there's elements of that. And it's a lot of research and things that, just once you know them, you just never forget them. It's like hair evidence was really relied on for a long time. And then they went, oh, this is bogus. And they didn't bring back hair evidence until DNA. And DNA is important in the 90s. About the mid-90s, DNA starts to become important. So he's doing things without DNA, and he would not have access to that as a private eye. So I do have to pay attention. Definitely.
All part of the fun of the research.
Yes, and unfortunately, I remember so much of what I'm writing about.
Right.
It was like, I have to check myself. I remember 80s, okay, Madonna, and then it's like, that song's later, and this one goes there, okay, so I have to check everything as I go along. I mean, I'm a big research on the fly kind of person. It's like I don't research before I write the book. I start writing the book, and it's like, I think I need to know this, find out what it is. So
at least you get to go to Google and not to the library for the microfiche.
Oh, yes. Actually, yes. I joke with my friends that my superhero name is the Mad Googler.
I would love to see the costume that goes with that. You should dress up like that for Halloween one year.
Yeah, I'll have to give that one some thought.
What that would look like.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Are you going to miss this when you don't have another one to write?
Well, I do have another series that I write, Pinx Video Mysteries, and I'm starting a new series in the spring, and probably will start another series after that. And if I miss him a lot, I'll figure out something.
Never say never.
Yes, I mean, the Boystown series is ending. Period. Maybe we'll see something with Nick later on. I don't know.
Okay. Let's talk about your most recent book outside of Boystown. Codename Liberty came out earlier this year. Another book set in the 80s, right around the Iran hostage crisis and Jimmy Carter transitioning over to Ronald Reagan. This book sounds very different from other stuff that you've written. What is this book about, and kind of what inspired you to write specifically about this bit of our history?
The book is about this kid, really. He's 20 years old. He's working in one of the high-end restaurants in Washington, D.C., and goes to a club opening up in the Fruit Loop and meets a prince who is a member of the Iranian royal family prior to the Shah that we're all familiar with. The Shah's family ousted these people. And so they're there, he and his father are in Washington trying to help out and help with the negotiations. And the kid is approached by a CIA agent who tells him that they're actually there to prevent the hostages from getting out, and that the CIA wants to keep an eye on them. And so that's how the story starts. I wanted to write something about that period for a long time. Jimmy Carter has grown in my estimation very much since I was a kid. I think there was the country turned against him, and a much better president than we give him credit for, and tried incredibly hard to get these people out. I mean, he didn't have Twitter, so he couldn't just whine. And in many respects, I think he's probably the best human being we've had in office in my lifetime. So I thought it was very important to write about. And also, I mean, I've been thinking about writing something in that period for 7 or 8 years, and it just seemed the right time, because to me, the hostage taking actually ended up becoming a foreign interference in our election. Because had they let them go, Carter would have won a second term, because he was not in bad shape until that. They deliberately refused to let them go until right after Reagan's inauguration. I mean, they wouldn't even give him the satisfaction of letting them go after he lost.
Right.
Which is terrible. And they gave us Ronald Reagan, who gave them arms. And somehow that's not a problem. But I mean, the story itself is actually, I mean, that's just the background of the story. I'm making it sound very political. It's actually a romantic thriller. And, you know, the kid is kind of caught between this CIA agent and this prince. And in many respects, it's all very glamorous, but, you know, it's also kind of scary, and there's lots of tension and a few murders and things like that.
So from PIs in the 80s to CIA in the 80s, that's a big pivot in knowing what to put in the story.
Yeah, but it's you know, I'm a big first person writer, so it's all told from this kid's point of view. So it's really all what he's seeing, you know, so it's not, you know, like I wasn't going into Langley with the CIA agent.
Okay.
And figuring out what that was like at the time. So, and I really enjoy writing first person, because it does really limit those things, and you have to figure out how to tell the story without bouncing all over the place. Although in this book, I do actually include what I call these little docudrama sections, you know, where there's like telexes about what's going on with the hostages and White House memos, and I made up an entry for Jimmy Carter's diary and things like that to keep the real political thing isolated to those entries, so you always had a context for what was going on.
What's coming up next? You hinted at some new series starting and what you're looking at into 2020. Tell us a little bit more.
Well, there's going to be the last Boystown book in January, and then I'm planning another Pinx Video Mystery. I think they're going to go to Vegas, which should be really fun. And then I'm working on a rural mystery that takes place in northern Lower Michigan, which is where I'm living now. So, and that actually, the Pinx books take place in the 90s, and then the new series is going to take place in the aughts. So I'm slowly moving forward.
Cool. So what's the best way for everyone to keep up with you online so they can keep track of all these projects coming in 2020?
I spend a lot of time on Facebook. I do have a website, but I don't go there very often. I've got a fan group on Facebook, and if people join, I will give them an audiobook free. So it shouldn't be hard to find that. I think it's just author Marshall Thornton. And if you have any trouble, then just hit me up on Facebook and I'll get you there.
Yeah, and we'll put it in the show notes so people can find it too.
Groovy.
Well, Marshall, thank you so much for coming and talking to us about the Boystown anniversary. Congratulations again, and certainly everyone should go out and pick up those books while they're on sale this month.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.